Hey everyone, welcome back to Horse 2 Cinema. Today I'm going to be doing my monthly video where I talk about my favorite watches, first-time watches of the past month. This month, of course, I'm going to be doing for May 2022. I watched a lot of movies last month, like, too many. But these are ones that I rated either 4.5 or 5 stars on Letterboxd. So we're going to start off strong with Paul Thomas Anderson's The Master. This is a pretty weird movie. I'll get into why in a minute, but before I do, I just want to mention that when I watched this with my roommates, right after it was over, one of them said something to the effect of, "That was odd." I agreed with him. I had that reaction too, but I also kind of thought this is like a 10 out of 10 masterpiece of a movie. So basically it's a World War II story about a Navy veteran named Freddie struggling to adjust to a post-war society, and at just the right time he meets a cult leader named Lancaster Dodd. Freddie then joins the cult and begins traveling with them to spread their teachings. I can definitely understand how someone could watch this film and see it as like maybe opaque or confusing. I was definitely a little bit confused towards the end, but I thought the film still had a really powerful message about the aimlessness of a post-war generation. You definitely see that with Freddie being a veteran. And it also has a really interesting message about cults and the power they have. Cults certainly have an ability to corrupt people, and some people have even interpreted this movie as being about the origins of Scientology. But in a weird way, this film is kind of just a love story between Freddie and Lancaster Dodd. It's not explicitly a love story, but there is, a lot of, especially towards the end, there's a lot of very primal energy and kind of homoerotic vibes that you get in their interactions. I think this is definitely a film where like the performances really carry it. I thought Philip Seymour Hoffman in particular was just so captivating. I think they struck the perfect balance of this character, you understand him really well, but he's also quite elusive and enigmatic. It's very much like a cult leader. Like, you get the gist of, what he does and what his function is, but there's a lot that is ticking on the surface that you can't quite see, and you just really want to know what's going on inside his head. So yeah, it's a weird movie, but I thought it was really, really interesting to watch, and I'll definitely be giving it a rewatch sometime. The next one I'm going to talk about is Tetsuo the Iron Man, which is a Japanese body horror movie from, I think, 1989. It was directed by Shinya Tsukamoto. So if you thought The Master was weird, wait till you see this movie. So I'll try and describe the plot in as simple terms as I can, because it'll be difficult. But basically, a metal fetishist is driven mad by an infected wound he's made in order to embed metal into his flesh. So after doing this, he runs out into the street where he's run over by a Japanese businessman and his girlfriend. They try to move on from the situation, but then the man finds out that he's basically cursed by this guy who he's run over, and his flesh begins to turn into iron. This is one of the most affecting body horror movies I've ever seen. This is, and I've seen quite a bit of David Cronenberg's work and both of Julia Ducournau's films, but this one really got under my skin. The way the metal looks, it grows in a way that's just so, unnatural looking, but at the same time, it kind of almost looks like mold is growing on your skin, and you kind of feel that throughout the movie. It made me think a little bit of American Werewolf in London, a lot of those, like the transformation sequences that they do there, except this is a much more like brutal version of that. But yeah, it's just so brilliantly done, and just the production design and art direction for this, metal suit is just fantastic. In terms of what it's about, I'm sure there's a lot of interpretations for this, but here's mine. I said in my Letterboxd review that it would be a really good pairing with this Ron Howard movie called Gung Ho. If you haven't seen that, don't worry. I saw it when I was in school in like an economics class, and I really hate that movie. I think it's a piece of shit, honestly. But my interpretation of Tetsuo the Iron Man is oddly similar to the interpretation of Gung Ho. Gung Ho is about a competition in ways between, Japanese businessmen and American businessmen in the auto industry. And you see how, like, the Japanese businessmen are kind of overworking themselves, but at the same time they're, being more productive than the Americans. But in Tetsuo, the main character is a businessman, kind of the typical salaryman as you see in Japan. And the life of the salaryman, especially one who works in the auto industry where you have a lot of metal, iron, is very perfect, I think, for Tetsuo. The repressed stress and sexuality, all of this that comes with working those long hours, was really brought out in this body horror. And it really only comes out when this character externalizes what brings him pain, which is the cold, metallic world of his job. So I don't know if that's what the director intended or anything with this film, but I thought it was a much better way than Gung Ho of expressing the difficulties of the life of the Japanese salaryman. So yeah, I really dig this one. It's really short. I think it's only like an hour and 5 minutes or something. So if you can find it, check it out. Next, I'm going to be taking on a lighter note and talking about Come On, Come On, which came out last year and was directed by Mike Mills. So yeah, it came out last year, and even though it got really good reviews, I never really got around to seeing it. And for me, honestly, I think the reason for that is just because when I saw the trailer, it kind of just looked like a corny feel-good movie. But, I mean, after seeing it, though, I think it's maybe my third favorite film of last year, behind Titan and Red Rocket. It's about a man who documents the lives of youth in different cities around the US, and at one point his sister asks him to take care of her son. And then Joaquin Phoenix's character and the son end up traveling around the U.S. together, and they basically learn things about each other. So yeah, the premise for this movie isn't exactly my cup of tea. It's just a family drama that centers around an uncle and a nephew bonding. Oftentimes movies like that can be very cheesy, sappy, and just ultimately very boring because the sentiment that they're going for just feels kind of cheap. But I really thought it wasn't here. I thought it was just so affecting and well done. This kid and his uncle really bring out the best in each other. Towards the end of the movie, you realize that one of the central conflicts of the film has been solved, and therefore the road trip is about to end. But for this kid especially, I mean, he's really grown from a lot of the conversations they've had along the trip. And the trip, especially for the viewer, kind of feels like it's the whole world to this kid. Going back to reality after, getting away for a while is really scary. And that idea just kind of stuck with me just because of how well executed it was. It's not exactly a novel idea, but again, just because it's so well executed, I just was very, very affected by it. I also really like that the kid wasn't annoying. I think a lot of family dramas, they cast kids that end up just being, very annoying for the audience, and like it's supposed to be endearing or something, but it's not exactly something that I want to experience when I'm watching a movie. But I thought this movie in particular really had like a perfect balance of finding that sense of, maturity, but also authenticity in how this kid kind of carries himself. So yeah, highly recommend Come On, Come On. Next, I'm going to be talking about Mad Max Fury Road, which was directed by George Miller. So I remember when the Oscars happened in I think it was 2015 or 2016, and we were just watching the award ceremony, and this film, which I hadn't really heard of, was just sweeping all of the technical awards categories. And we were all like, what is this Mad Max movie, and why is it getting such acclaim? And over the years, of course, I've learned about George Miller and about the Mad Max franchise, but I had never seen any of the movies until this year. And after watching it, I have to say, why the fuck did I wait this long to watch it? Everything people say about this movie is true. It's just pure cinema. It's one of the greatest action movies ever made, and it's definitely the best action movie I've seen this century. The stunts feel right out of the 1980s in the sense that everything back then had to be done practically. They could maybe clean things up a bit with CGI, and of course Mad Max Fury Road I'm sure does, but I mean everything at the core of it has to be done with real people doing real stunts. I think a common criticism of this movie, though, is that it's, yes, the action is amazing, but it's just it's not very focused on the characters, and it's just one long action sequence, so it can feel a bit draining. But I think this response from people makes sense given how action movies look today. We're very used to seeing, convoluted plots and a lot of exposition back and forth between characters that I ultimately don't care about that much. So if you're just a modern audience member and that's kind of what you're used to seeing, then, I mean, I can understand how seeing this would be a massive departure from that and just kind of feel off. But I think you might have missed the point a little bit. I don't think Mad Max Fury Road, neglects to develop its characters. I think it does. It just does it not through exposition, but through action. I think Furiosa in particular, and especially and all of the wives of Joe that are fleeing with Mad Max and Furiosa, I think they're all really interesting characters. I kind of found Mad Max to be the least interesting character of all of them. But yeah, Furiosa in particular has such an interesting background, and the way her arc is developed throughout the film is just fantastic. And it's not done through exposition, it's just done through the action of the story, which I think is just kind of the genius of it. I also love how this movie just isn't afraid to be over the top at all. I think a lot of action movies today have a look to them that's very interchangeable, and I think part of that's just because they can be very grounded in reality, and they kind of want to go for realism as a virtue. But I think oftentimes that just takes the fun out of it, and I think Mad Max Fury Road really understands that sometimes it's better to just be a little goofy and old school about things. So there's a sequence in one of the chase scenes where there's a guy who is part of the villains, and he's standing on top of a car playing an electric guitar that shoots fire out of the end of it, for fuck's sake. Which is hilarious because this takes place in a universe in which gas is an extremely scarce resource. But I don't know, when I watched that, I just said, fuck yes, this movie understands the tone of what action movies should be. So I watched this on a plane, which I know that's really disappointing. I want an IMAX theater to re-release this, and I want to see it there because it was just amazing. Next, I'm going to talk about Pan's Labyrinth, which is directed by Guillermo del Toro. I'm still fairly new to del Toro, and I think this is the first of his Spanish language films that I've seen. Most people tend to say that either this or Devil's Backbone is probably his best film, and I can certainly see why this might be it. If you don't know the story, it's basically that a young girl and her pregnant mother go to live with the girl's new stepdad, who is a member of Franco's fascist military in Spain. And while there, the girl discovers an abandoned labyrinth in which a mysterious fawn creature tells her to do different trials. And the film intertwines this fantasy world with the harsh realities of war and fascism that exist in her real world. I thought this was just a beautiful, fantasy film with just very elaborate sets and prosthetics and everything. The scene with the guy with the I don't know what you call him, but the really pale man with the eyes on his the palms of his hands was just great. More than that, it's a heartbreaking, and I mean heartbreaking, war movie. The whole movie, when you think about it, is just this girl, trying to escape from her horrible reality into this, fantasy world. And there's a lot of ways, I think, of interpreting the end of the film, but regardless of whether it's real or not, I think that what happens to her at the end, she's better off in this world, in the fantasy world, than in the real world. And it's just kind of a look at what war and particularly fascism do to this particular brand of childhood innocence. I don't know, it's just a very vulnerable and just a beautiful looking movie. I can't recommend this one enough. And the last movie I'm going to talk about is Videodrome, which was directed by David Cronenberg. So I mentioned in my Crimes of the Future review that I've gotten a little bit more into Cronenberg's work, and I think this is probably my favorite Cronenberg film. It tells the story of a CEO of a TV station who finds a broadcast signal called Videodrome, which basically just shows victims being tortured and killed. And he sees this as the new future of TV and buys the rights to air it. However, after his psychosexual obsessed girlfriend disappears, he sets off on an investigation of Videodrome, where he basically just finds out how real it actually is. This is probably the densest Cronenberg film I've seen in terms of the content, what the story is trying to say, the different interpretations you can take away from it. But even from the first watch, I really thought this was just profound. It deconstructs the extent to which we process violent entertainment and how that affects our lives. But not in a way, I mean, you often hear on TV that violent video games are causing our kids to commit, acts of violence. And it's not like that. It's much more nuanced and in depth. It basically proposes that the only thing that's real is what we can perceive. And if we perceive violence that's on TV and entertainment in general, that violence is real to us. The film has a quote that's something like, "Television is reality, and reality is less than television." Because of course we project whatever we think about, what we're seeing onto the entertainment in itself, and that becomes more of a reality than what we, just think of in our heads. This theme of, television being reality is of course very rooted in the body horror elements of the film, where the man and the technology that he has come to love start to merge, and ultimately that merging of man and technology will lead to this man's downfall. So yeah, it's a super interesting movie, very disturbing for sure, but it'll definitely, it's not one of those horror movies that's just, gratuitous violence or whatever. It'll definitely leave you thinking for a while. Anyway, those are my favorite movies I've watched over the past month in May 2022. I just want to thank you guys so much for watching, and if you like this video, you can like the video down below and subscribe to the channel if you want. I've got more content coming out soon, and I will see you guys in the next one.